Tell me how you got involved in it.
Sure. Well, it's kind of an unusual answer, I think. A rock star called me up one day by the name of Tom DeLong, who happened to be passionate about this issue and had seen an article I had published. And just out of the blue, he called, and he had a company he was standing up called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. And it was largely other government, former government officials, CIA and others. So I started to network with those guys, and through them, I met Lou Elizondo at the Pentagon. And I attended a briefing with him in 2016, and I learned that our East Coast fighter squadrons were having recurring weekly incidents off the coast with vehicles of unknown origin that had no transponders, that seemed like they were probably engaged in espionage or clandestine collection. They varied in type and size and so forth, but nobody was doing anything about it. Nothing. Nobody was even reporting it up the chain. It was just outrageous. And when I found that out, I just said, "This is unacceptable." I'm from the intel community myself. I'm ashamed that this is happening, and I want to do anything I can, Lou, to help remedy this situation. So I jumped in and started working with Lou on this.
Now, I'm wondering what kind of reception you got inside government as you said, hey, wait a second, why isn't anyone dealing with this?
Yeah, it wasn't easy, and what enabled us to make progress. Let me say, initially we failed, by the way, inside the government. I had two friends, wonderful, bright, young former military guys who were direct reports to General Mattis himself, and they understood that this at that level this was real, but we still couldn't take it the next level to the secretary himself. There was so much concern about the exact stigma that you're talking about. There was concern that even by taking a briefing on the topic, if that was revealed, it could damage him politically. So they wanted to just, shunt it off, put it in the back in the corner somewhere, which wasn't going to do anything. And Lou and I talked about it extensively, and he made the very difficult and fairly profound decision to resign over this issue, provide a resignation letter to the Secretary of Defense explaining why he was resigning, what this problem was, and then he started working with me to help get it into the papers, into the New York Times, and in front of Congress.
And you were quite concerned not only for the pilots who are witnessing this, my understanding is, on a daily, sometimes daily basis, but you see this as a threat, these things out there.
Well, we're clearly vulnerable, and it's very disturbing. And let me uh, try to explain this a little bit, because some people have accused me of trying to, create some justification for increased military spending or something. This is a combination. What I discovered at the time was something of a mix between Pearl Harbor and 9/11. In Pearl Harbor, we had a radar established. They saw the incoming Japanese aircraft, but they were unable to get a warning up the chain. They didn't pass the information along. They didn't know what they were looking at, and they just didn't bother. In 9/11, we had a situation where FBI and CIA weren't talking to each other. Well, that is going on in spades also in this situation. And one might have thought we would have learned those lessons, and yet this is still happening. So it doesn't mean there's an imminent threat. It doesn't mean that, we need to have our hair on fire, overreact. But clearly, if somebody's in your house, in your bedroom, walking around, you want to know who it is, right? You want to identify them. It's just a prudent thing to do.
So you see this as a national security issue?
Absolutely. I don't know. I mean, how could we look at it? How could it not be when you've got vehicles that are routinely penetrating restricted military airspace, and we seem unable to engage them effectively? We have no idea where they're coming from or what their capabilities are or what their intent is. So it's not a threat in the sense of we know somebody intends to do us harm or seeks to exploit it. You might call it a vulnerability, a strategic vulnerability. And that is something we have to evaluate, because we've got a tremendous chink in our armor, it appears. What happened in Saudi Arabia recently, where they lost half their oil refining capability as a result of a drone strike from some rebels in Yemen. If that heavily defended airspace with one of the largest military budgets in the world, if they could suffer that much damage from a rebel group, if this turns out to be, say, the Chinese, and we get into a conflict in Taiwan or the South China Sea, it could be devastating.
How do you think things have changed? And I'm thinking way back, in the 40s and the 50s, and people were talking about little green men and attack from Mars and that kind of thing. It seems to me, but now that the government is taking this seriously, that it's almost gone mainstream in a sense.
Well, the fact that the government has acknowledged that this is happening was an incredible breakthrough in terms of alleviating a lot of the stigma. So once the government formally and officially and publicly says, this is real, that's happening, that gets people's attention, and that does impart a lot of credibility that didn't exist before. So that was a huge change, and they were compelled to do that because when Congress, when we got the attention of some of the oversight committees and they started asking for briefings, that had to go up the chain, and the Navy and Defense Department couldn't tell the senators one thing and the public something else. So they sort of had to acknowledge this and come clean on this.
This report coming out in a month or so, or maybe it's delayed. What do you want to see in that report? What do you want acknowledged, I guess, in that report when it comes out?
Well, the committee has put forward a number of very pertinent questions, and if they just answer the questions that are asked, it should be a very important and significant report. So they've been asked to review all the classified information, assess it, determine if there's reason, how much reason there is to be concerned. Is there a threat? They want to know who is in charge of this issue within the government, what the process is going to be going forward for pooling the information from all the different agencies and military services that have information in separate stovepipes. They want to know if there's evidence of technology that is more advanced than anything in our inventory. So I think if they take on those questions, just answer the mail, that will be very significant and a big step forward.
Do you want some kind of truth, or some kind of some kind of vindication, I guess, for the work that you've done?
The truth is what we're after, and I think if they tell the truth, and it's going to be hard not to, because enough people now have more information. I think unlike Project Blue Book in 1970, they're going to have to acknowledge that there is something there we need to be concerned about from a national security standpoint, and that we're observing, in some cases, vehicles that demonstrate capabilities beyond anything we possess. If they're really candid, they'll have to go so far as to say, we don't even understand how you could build something that would do that. We don't even understand the science behind it. Not like somebody's a couple generations of fighter aircraft ahead of us. I mean, this is a whole difference of kind, not degree. So I think that report, given the knowledge that is disseminated now, they're not going to be able to entirely duck this. And I think it's going to start to change people's thinking a little bit.
Why do you think they want to monitor U.S. military forces?
Well, probably largely for the same reason we do, to understand what threat we could pose to them. Should a conflict arise, they want to be able to engage us effectively and defeat us rapidly and minimum cost of life and treasure, just as we would on the other side. So we do the similar kinds of things. We don't have vehicles quite like this, but we're certainly very actively monitoring military forces in other countries.
How involved are you in the study of this and some of the other videos that have come out?
I do some private consulting. So I occupy no position in government, but I do answer the phone and have a lot of friends still there and try to help when I can.
No one's laughing at you for believing in other worldly things?
Well, I'm not suggesting there are otherworldly things necessarily. I'm just pointing out that there is no scientific basis for denying that that could be the explanation in some cases. And moreover, it's hard to think of a better hypothesis in some cases. What other explanation accounts for a vehicle that can fly all day, drop from space to sea level at hypersonic speeds, then hover, then shoot off again at hypersonic speeds with a low radar cross section with no combustion technology, no air intake, no wings, no visible means of propulsion, no control surfaces. If somebody can tell me a better explanation, I would love to hear it.
Would I call you a believer in UFOs?
Yes, I do undoubtedly believe that we see things that are unidentified. What's concerning is they're swarming some of our warships. They're hovering in places where we're doing workups for operations and training and deployment. They're not going to the scenic places, it seems. So what they are is the big question, of course, and I don't claim to know. And I think we're going to find it's probably more than one operator behind this, because we're seeing some very different and distinct kinds of aircraft, kinds of vehicles.
Why do you think they're here? Why do you think this is happening?
Well, it appears, perhaps not surprisingly, that we know a lot of potential adversaries are interested in our military capabilities. We're the big guy on the block, and countries like Russia and China want to keep a very close tab on what we have and what we do and how we do it. What it seems to me is that somebody is conducting clandestine reconnaissance, and although in some cases, curiously, they've become more bold. And recently, in some of these cases, say in 2019, it's clear they wanted to be observed, and it seemed they were trying to provoke us to test our air defense capabilities, see how we react, what frequencies we emit on, all that kind of thing. So it's gotten a little more bold, a little more aggressive, a little more concerning.
So do you think it's China and Russia, or do you think it's otherworldly?
I really am reluctant to speculate, in part because it can paralyze the process. If we just don't have the data to answer the question. Speculation is easy. What we really need is more data. And unfortunately, the second you start talking about anything off world, a lot of people just shut down. The conversation's over.
Do you know of anything specifically that has happened in Canada?
Oh, sure. There's lots of incidents where NORAD has had. I interviewed a colonel from NORAD on the Unidentified television show, and he talked about a high flying UAP that came down from the Arctic, crossed Canada, and we were scrambling everything we could in the air to intercept this thing, and we're unable to intercept it. And it went out over Florida and Cuba and disappeared. There's a famous case in Canada of a gentleman, I think he was a miner, and he was in the woods and claims to have come across a craft that was landed, and he approached it, and he ended up getting like radiation burns on his chest and had to go to the hospital. But when they went to investigate, they did find the vegetation charred and what looked like a place where something heavy and hot had set down, and he had these wounds on his chest. So there's some very interesting stories about things that have happened in Canada.